just occurred to me that a lot of you probably know me. I know that I know a lot of you, and you see me a lot of times here at the concerts in Smithfield. We started the Christmas concerts about 20 years ago, and I know some of you have been there. So I've been elected to represent the church here to welcome you, the Amenia Historical Society. I'm really excited to see the program. And there will be more precise words said than this. Just because of the Historical Society, I would like to say to you that this church is registered as a historical building. And my organ is upstairs in my piano. I won't claim the pulpit. And so after the presentation, you're very welcome to go up. The sanctuary is beautiful. The 1894 Steinway Grand is amazing, and we have a Civil War era track organ up there. So as people interested in history, you'll probably enjoy just hanging out for a couple of minutes afterwards. So, welcome, and thank you for being here. Thank you.
I see a lot of familiar faces here, and thank you all for coming today. It's such a beautiful day, and we're all going to learn some stuff today, probably share some words with each other. And again, thank you for coming. My name is Keith Westfall. I live now in Millerton, New York. I was born and raised in Amenia, and I work for the town of Amenia now. And I hope that you all get something out of this today. Thank you again for coming. By the way, the person that introduced me, or welcomed me today, her name is Denise Jordan Finley. Our historian for the town of Amenia, and also our genealogist for the town of Amenia, and everything else that she does behind the scenes. Betsy Strauss.
She's our acting president at the moment, but within a couple of weeks she will be our president, I am sure. But welcome everyone, so glad you could make it. I just want to introduce our speaker. And his name is Jay Campbell. His wife, Mary Campbell, is with him. And Jay has lived in Michigan for 45 years before moving to New York. He was involved in the pharmaceutical company and then did a right turn and got into history. And so he's written many articles and done a lot of research that he'll be sharing with you. So I want you to welcome Jay Campbell and his wife.
I'm very happy to be here in this very historic part of New York. I lived in Westchester when I was in New York, but my interest kind of took me over to the other side of the river. And so that's why I'll be talking about Cadwallader Colden Jr., who lived in what was then Ulster County, is today part of Orange County. So how many people here are from the east side of the river? Is everybody here from the east side? Okay, nobody from the west side? Have any? Okay. Excellent. So what county?
Actually, I was just born and raised over there.
Okay, well, excellent.
So it would be Ulster, Kingston area.
Oh, fantastic. So the story today involves Kingston quite a few times. So, yeah. So what I'm hoping to do here is kind of kick off the 250th anniversary of our remembrances around the War for Independence. And 250 years ago, Cadwallader Colden Jr. was a gentleman farmer in the county of Ulster. And like a lot of New Yorkers 250 years ago, he felt he had a great affinity for his mother country, for Great Britain, and he had some questions about this move towards independence. And so luckily for us, he kept a lot of the letters he sent and wrote down a lot of his thoughts, and they occur in a journal which still survives. And so that's what I'll be drawing most of my information from today. The cover of his journal said, the Journal of Cadwallader Colden, Esquire. I don't know why he wrote Esquire. I suppose he had many titles, but he was really a junior. Usually he signed his name Junior, so he wasn't confused with the more well-known Senior, and we'll be talking about the Senior in a minute. And of course, you know, the war lasted a lot longer than 1776 to 1779, but the letters that are contained in the journal are only from those years. So we're kind of missing a little bit here of what happened before and after, but I'll talk a little bit about what we know about those times. So I first came across this journal when I was researching some of my family that lived in Ulster County back in the same period. And so I went to the New York Historical Society and read his journal on microfilm. Have you ever used these microfilm readers? I mean, they are painful. But what I learned from that is there was some good stuff in this journal. And years later, the Huntington Library, who owns the original of this, digitized it, put it online, and I joined forces with Professor Kieran O'Keefe, who's an expert in New York Loyalists, and he and I transcribed the journal, we annotated, and then published it. So most of what I'll be talking with you today is actually taken from Kieran and my book, and so we'll get on from there. So one of the challenges of the revolutionary authorities 250 years ago was what to do with people like Colden. So Colden said he would not speak or write against the revolution, but he would not support it. So he was kind of called a neutral person. And the authorities didn't really like that very much, and they kind of struggled with what to do with those people. And just to give you a quick jump into the future, one of the things they did with these people is they sent them to very far away places where they couldn't do any damage. And one of those places was northeast Dutchess County. So that's kind of how I came in contact with Betsy, kind of asking about who these characters were in where Colden went to stay while I was in exile. I'll come back to that later. So if you want to find out who Cadwallader Colden Jr. is and you Google it, you come up with a picture of this guy who's not Cadwallader Colden Jr. This is his father. And as far as I have been able to find, there is no portrait of Jr. Maybe he looked like his father, maybe he didn't. But his father has several portraits done of him. He was very well known. He was known throughout the colonies as kind of an intellectual. He corresponded with Benjamin Franklin about all kinds of things. He's the guy that kind of supposedly told Benjamin Franklin to start an American Philosophical Society, and he was one of the first members of that society. But one of the things to help us understand Cadwallader Colden Jr. is to maybe understand a little bit more how he was like and not like his father. And in many ways, they weren't alike at all. Once again, his father was this intellectual. His father traveled in high circles, was appointed to high office. He was trained as a physician. He was actually trained as a physician in Scotland and London. Then he came to the US, he became a merchant. Then he became a surveyor. He surveyed up in Western New York and where the Iroquois Nation was. He actually wrote a book on the Indians, the Iroquois Nation up there, which became a very well-read book. And then he became a member of the Provincial Council in New York. Eventually became the senior member of the Provincial Council and was the lieutenant governor. So he was extremely well-known, was wealthy, whereas Cadwallader Colden Jr. seemed to follow a little bit different path. He didn't seem to be quite as charismatic. He had an excellent education provided by his father and his mother, but he chose farming. And he was probably, from all accounts, a very good farmer. So one of the things that happened in about the year that shortly after Cadwallader Colden Jr. was born is his father decided that New York City was not a great place for the family. He wanted to move them to someplace with cleaner air, cleaner water, a better place to raise children, and he moved them to his estate in Ulster County, which he called Coldenham. So this was about 1728. So Cadwallader Colden Jr. was about 6 years old. He had about 5 other brothers and sisters at that point. and 3 more children would be born at the Coldenham estate. I looked around for a sketch of that original home, and the closest I could come was this map. So this is a map provided by the family from 1811, and this is kind of what the closest thing we have right now. Maybe somebody will come up with a better sketch, but this was a sketch made in 1811 of what that home looked like. And we'll talk more about this home up here that was built by Colden Jr. So Alice was the wife of Cadwallader Sr. They raised all their children in that home on the Colden estate. And it was kind of still wilderness area. It was kind of a backcountry area. And Alice was also college educated at the university, so she was a very good teacher for the children. And even though the father, Cadwallader Colden Sr., had a lot of other obligations, they got a very good education from the many visitors they had, plus what Alice could provide. And even though Cadwallader was not a favorite son, and this becomes pretty clear in his writing, that Cadwallader Jr.'s other brothers were more favorite, and he actually had a sister that Cadwallader Sr. paid a lot of attention to. Still, his father provided a lot of opportunities for him. He gave him land. He made sure he got surveying jobs. He made sure that he had a good an officer position in the military. During King George's War, he actually became a commissary officer. So he was homeschooled, and in 1745, he married Elizabeth Ellison, who was the daughter of a local merchant, Thomas Ellison. From all accounts, Elizabeth Ellison did a great job raising their children and maintaining the household. Some of the other things he did during those years is he was a surveyor. He was over here in Dutchess County doing some surveys on the oblong patent in 1747. He became a captain in the local militia that was really arranged by his father, but later on he was promoted to major, and that's just in the local militia. And then in 1760, so 2 years before his mother and 2 sisters die, something very critical happens to the family. The father, senior, he was 72 years old in 1760. He was promoted to be the acting governor of New York. And so this was kind of a blessing, but a curse, because the 1760s were not a good time to be associated with the royals in New York. And at about this time, Cadwallader Sr. moves back to New York City, leaving Cadwallader Jr. in Coldenham with the estate. And as I mentioned, it was kind of a turbulent time, and one of the reasons were the different taxations that were placed upon the colonists during that time. And one was called the Stamp Act of 1765. So this was a tax on everything that was paper. So if you were going to do a mortgage, you had to buy the paper from the government and pay the tax associated with the paper. It was very unpopular. Colden Sr. was down in New York City. Some of the rioters dragged his carriage from Fort George, which is down there on the tip of Manhattan, and burned it. So from that point on, the Colden name was really kind of known with British oppression, and that did affect Colden Jr. a little bit, because he wanted to run for the New York State Assembly, and when he ran for office in 1768, he was defeated. So despite, and probably maybe because of his Colden name, he was defeated. But another thing he did about this time in 1767 was he ran a little store out of his home in Coldenham. So he built this stone home in Coldenham about 1687, and about the same year he opened a store. So this is a sketch, a very early sketch of the house, and I have a photograph of the house from about 100 years after that. So we think this picture was taken about late 1760s, and you can see it still looks in great shape and looks very grand. But we think he ran a store either out of the home or someplace close to the home. And luckily for me, the day book of this store had survived. So this is a book that shows all the transactions from this store for a period of about 2 years in 1767 and 1768. And there were over 4,000 transactions in the store during that time, hundreds of surnames. So if you're looking for a surname of somebody that lived in that area, you might find them shopping at that store. There were about 12,000 items sold, items that you wouldn't find in stores today. And so one of the things I did several years ago is I got a group together to transcribe this into a database that could be searched online. And you can now get to this database at the Orange County Historical Society's webpage. If you just go there, you go to collections, and one of the collections is the Colden store database. And another thing that is there is this, there's a blog there that has over 100 articles on different items that were sold at the store and different people that shopped at the store. So it's a gold mine of information if you have relatives that lived about that time in Ulster County. So let's jump back to the Revolution here. And we're talking about the 250th anniversary, so I thought it'd be appropriate if we talked about what happened in 1775 in April. And this is kind of the month that's generally recognized as the month when the Revolution started, because that's when the skirmish at Lexington and Concord happened, the shot heard around the world. In New York, they were about to hold a provincial convention in New York City, and that actually happened a day later down in New York City, and the purpose of this convention was to elect people to go to the Second Continental Congress. So they didn't know this had happened. They didn't know the skirmish had happened. In fact, they had adjourned before word actually got to New York City that there had been military action up in Boston. But as soon as they heard about this, they created these Articles of Association, which were basically saying that we recognize the New York Provincial Convention and the Continental Congress as the official ruling bodies of the United Colonies, and we'll follow whatever they say. So if you signed that, you were kind of signing on for the Revolution. But what happened even before that, before all this, Cadwallader Jr. published a petition or a protest against the election that had happened to elect these delegates that went to this convention. And one of the things he put in his petition was that he and everybody else that signed his petition, they were not going to recognize and they were not going to obey any of the resolutions that came out of these illegal congresses. So it's kind of the opposite of what the Articles of Association said. And so I sometimes wonder if maybe they saw this, what he petitioned, and when they were drawing up the Articles of Association, they just put the opposite on there. It's probably not true. And this is from a real document of Cadwallader Jr.'s signature. So anyway, this was kind of a bad way to start. Well, it kind of published the fact that he was a loyalist and that he was adamantly opposed to any military action or any of these congresses that were being drawn up. But within a few weeks, he kind of saw which way the winds were blowing, and he actually ended up signing the Articles of Association in his precinct. And after that, he was not overtly opposed to the war. He became one of these neutral people who didn't say anything against it, but he wouldn't say anything for it. So that I think is kind of interesting. But he couldn't stay out of trouble for some reason. They thought he was accumulating weapons in his house, and he was arrested in June of 1776. And he was taken up to Kingston, which was the county seat of Ulster. He was held in a jail. They decided to exile him to Boston, but they couldn't figure out who was going to escort them, how long he should be there, what the terms were. So they actually sent him back home to his farm. So it's this concept of parole. So a lot of honor was a big thing back there. So if you said you were going to stay on your farm, they would parole you to your farm on your honor. You might have to sign something to say, I will not go more than 5 miles from my farm. But there he had to stay until they decided what to do with him. So the British attacked Brooklyn and started the battle for New York about July of 1776. So after he'd gone to Kingston and come back to his farm, that happened. And so the George Washington's army and the New York government got pushed north and went north to Harlem, went north to White Plains. Eventually, they got pushed up to Fishkill. And it was about that time that Colden got arrested again. They came to his home and they arrested him. And this time, they took him to Fishkill. So that's where the New York government was at the time. So this is where his journal starts. His journal starts right after he got arrested and was sent to Fishkill. And the first part of his journal starts with letters dated December of 1776 and January of 1777. And they were at Connor's Tavern. Connor's Tavern in Fishkill doesn't exist anymore, but it was right across from the Reformed Church that's still there. So if you get a chance to go to Fishkill and see the Reformed Church, it's a famous historical church where the New York Convention met and where they had many of their deliberations. So the first letter begins this way, Dear Sir, you no doubt, and we don't know who Dear Sir was. I think he was just writing to people in general, like you sometimes do in a diary where you say, Dear World. And he says, you no doubt have heard of my sufferings and persecutions on account of my attachment to our good old Constitution. And then it's he kind of goes on with all of his sufferings, all the things he's been through in the past year, and that goes on for about 40 pages of his journal. And I'll read some from your journal, and you can see how tedious some of it is, but that was his style of writing. Like I say, he was not as charismatic as his father. But this is kind of where it and another map has been reproduced over there that has some of the travels of Colden during this period of his life. But his home was located right to the west of Newburgh. And so, initially he was arrested and sent up to Kingston. And he could have sailed up there, but from most accounts, most of the time people would travel up on this road along the Walker River up to Kingston. So we think that's where his first adventure went to. And then the second time he was arrested, I think was jailed one night in Newburgh, then they took him across the river to Fishkill. And so that's where he stayed for about 3 or 4 months until he was paroled again. Yeah, he was paroled again back to his farm after that stay in Fishkill. So we've seen this before. So this is where he was arrested in November of 1776 before he was taken to Fishkill. And I thought I'd show you a couple evolutions of the home. So in about 1870, they put on a mansard roof. So this was kind of all the rave, I guess, is to put mansard roofs on everything. So a lot of homes were redone. And you can see it's got the dormer windows up here. And it was lived in until about 1940, and then it went into disrepair, and it sat vacant, and there were all kinds of articles in the Newburgh newspaper about let's save this historic house, but it never was. And it wasn't about 2012 when they finally stabilized the ruins. You can hardly see this now, but the stone walls are back there. They've capped some of the walls so the water doesn't seep in and freeze and crack them. But I was just there yesterday. They haven't done anything with it since 2012. And at one point they were thinking about kind of making it into a park where you could walk up to it. You can't even get close to it now because they say there's just too many things there. It could be dangerous. There might be old wells you could fall in. And I think they want to do like an archaeological survey of this before they kind of turn it into a park, and they just haven't had the funds to do it. So currently it belongs to the town of Montgomery in Orange County. But luckily, in about 1940, somebody from the Metropolitan Museum of Art came out and they took out the paneling from the west parlor, and it is now on display. You can go see this paneling in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the Colonial Parlor exhibit. And so what I like to imagine is that in November of 1776, Colden was sitting here with his wife Elizabeth, and when that knock came on the door, and I started thinking, who would have been in the room with him? And I think sometimes it's important to remember these types of things when we're talking about what people went through 250 years ago, because you can get lost in numbers and times and dates. But there were like family members involved, and there's often some very complicated relationships. So Elizabeth Ellison, his wife, her father was Thomas Ellison. Thomas Ellison was a very well-to-do merchant along the Hudson River near New Windsor, New York. And he had a house with a great view of the river, so you could see if the British were coming up and down the river. And at one point, he was a patriot, and at one point, George Washington would use his house on the river as a headquarters. So I think it was about 1778 or 79 when that happened. So there is a possibility that Thomas Ellison was in the home that night. And the reason I say that is because he was in failing health, and we know that a couple years later, he would die in this home. He would die in the stone home as an old man before the war was over. So another person that might have been in the house was Cadwallader's son, Cadwallader III. And Cadwallader III was married to Elizabeth Fell. And the Fell family was from New Jersey. They were extremely patriotic. Her father was currently sitting in jail in New York City, being captured during the battle for New York. So the fact that there were two very patriotic families associated with the Coldens might have helped the rest of the family. It didn't seem to help Cadwallader Jr., but I think the rest of the family survived the war, maybe because of that relationship. 1776 was kind of a sad year for the Coldens, and I'll talk more about this in a minute. But one of the things that happened is Colden Jr.'s daughter died. She left two daughters herself. So the Coldens had two granddaughters living with them at this time. So they might have been still in this room. He had an older daughter who was unmarried, who was still living with them. He had two teenage sons, Alexander and David, and they were likely staying in here. And then he had his youngest daughter was named Peggy, so she was undoubtedly here. So Peggy wasn't married yet, but within a couple years, before the war was over, she would marry another person from the Fell family. So two Coldens married children of this Judge John Fell, who's now in prison in New York City. So there were very complicated family relationships back then, and I think this parlor kind of helps us take us back to some of those situations. Okay, so we'll move on to what happened in Fishkill, and I thought I'd just read a couple of excerpts from the book so you get a feel for some of the ways that Colden wrote. Some of them, like I say, can be tedious, but one of the things he writes here in Fishkill is, I did not think in my conscience that I was absolved from the oaths of allegiance to the King of Britain. So he thought everybody thought they had taken an oath to the king as being a citizen of a British colony. And how, gentlemen, am I to get over this matter of conscience? So conscience comes up time and time and again in his defenses of why he cannot support the rebellion, is that he's made this oath to the king that he cannot break. So another common theme to him was that he'd always been a good neighbor. So I thought I'd read something else he spoke in Fishkill. He says, can a man be thought to be an enemy to his country who in his heart is not an enemy to one individual in it? I have been brought up among you from my infancy, and I am now in my 55th year of age. Is there one among you that can say that either I or my father, before me ever willfully injured or oppressed a man? Have we not upon all occasions been willing to relieve and assist our country, as well as any particular person in any distress or affliction? And even in building your meeting houses and supporting your ministers. So even though Colden was not a Presbyterian, he did contribute to the Presbyterian churches in that area and help them pay for their ministers. So he had done a lot of good things. He had provided a lot of employment for people around there. So it really hurt him that when he heard that people in his neighborhood were not happy about him being around. So as I mentioned, from Fishkill, he was paroled back to his home again because, once again, they hadn't quite figured out what to do with him. But he was arrested a third time in May of 1777. He was arrested again. So 1777, they kind of had seasons of battle. In the winter, they kind of like went into their winter quarters and didn't fight much. But they usually started fighting maybe May, June. And they certainly didn't fight. They weren't worried about the British until the ice melted in the Hudson. And in 1777, one of their ideas was to put a chain across the river here at Fort Montgomery. So they were working to put that in place, but they were really afraid of the British Navy coming up from Manhattan, because Britain now occupied New York City. They're afraid of them coming up and attacking their capital, Kingston. And also they knew that way up north here, General Burgoyne was coming down from Canada. So there was a lot of fear in 1777. And maybe because of this was one of the reasons they kind of freaked out and at this point and arrested Colden for the third time. The reason they arrested him here is because there were rumors he was helping some soldiers move through the countryside down to join up with the British Army. And that was actually true. They had dropped by his house, asked him for refreshment, and he had provided it. And supposedly also gave some direction to some of them which way to go. So they took him down along with all the other people that were passing through, they captured all of them. They took them down to Fort Montgomery. General Clinton was there. So General George Clinton was the head of the New York militia. He would eventually become elected the first governor of the state of New York. And they were all tried here, except for Colden. They were all sentenced to death. Luckily, Colden didn't get tried. He kind of got there late before the other ones were. But they decided to send them all back up to Kingston, and because that's where the legislature was meeting, or the convention was meeting, and they thought they'd throw it onto them, let them decide whether to really execute these people and what to do with Colden. So they were actually sailed back up to Kingston, and they were held in the jail there. And by this time, there was kind of word that there was some fighting going on to the north, and everybody was watching. They had spies watching the Navy down here, figuring out what they were going to do. And in October, Colden was up here, and he was actually paroled at this Van Dusen home in Hurley, so he was a little ways from Kingston. And the British came up. They made it through the chain at Fort Montgomery. They captured the forts at Montgomery, and they kept coming up. And eventually, in October, they burned Kingston to the ground. And Colden was nearby and kind of saw the whole thing. Of course, you can imagine after this, the Patriots weren't too happy. And in about November is when they said, we're really going to have to get rid of these people that could be slipping secrets to the British. And Colden was included in that number. He was actually staying at this home with another loyalist by the name of Roloff Eltinge. And Eltinge also owned a store much like Colden had. And one of Eltinge's offenses is that when somebody had come to pay for a store item, he hadn't accepted continental currency. He only wanted continental currency was famous for depreciating and never being worth anything. And that was a crime. And for that, he was put in the Van Dusen home with Colden. So in November, they were ordered to go into exile to what they called 9 Partners, which is right over here we are today, to the care of Ezra and Enos Thompson and Matthias Miller, who all lived in kind of what is now the Federal Square area. So they took the ferry across the river here from Kingston over to Rhinecliff, and then slowly made their way to Ezra Thompson's home, spending one night in a tavern along the way. And when they actually arrived on a Sunday and met Enos Thompson, and Ezra Thompson was not there. They said Ezra Thompson was in meeting, and I kind of wonder if maybe he was right here in church on that Sunday when Colden showed up. So wouldn't that be something? So they waited till later in the day until Ezra came back from meeting, and they kind of met on what should happen with the parole. Now, why don't we step through this map? So I don't know if you've seen this one before. This is an old 1797 map by Jacob Smith, and you'll recognize this boundary line here. This is the boundary line between Stanford and Amenia. So that was the way it was in 1797. Of course, this is northeast now. When Colden went in, this was not Stanford. This was the precinct of Charlotte. So we think he probably came somewhere on the roads here and then came down to meet Enos and Ezra Thompson here at the square. Matthias Miller was the third person they put in charge of him. And Matthias Miller was a surgeon, and he also had a home in this area. We don't know exactly where it was. And so they spent one night at a place called Talmadge's Tavern, and we think that was around here someplace. And then they spent a night with Matthias Miller, and then the remainder of the time they spent with Israel Lewis. And his home, the Lewis brothers had bought 600 acres up here near current Attlebury. And Israel kind of had the northern part, and Daniel had the southern part of that. Whether they actually stayed at this home here, I'm not positive, but that's where Israel Lewis was living at the time, and they said they stayed with him. And so I'm thinking that's maybe a likely location. So Ezra Thompson this is his home at the square. And so they met several times with Ezra, probably in just the older section of his home, which I imagine was this section. And then they stayed with Israel Lewis. So this is currently, I think, Rocky Reef or something. You know where Rocky Reef is, up on 82? So this home still exists. I'm not sure if any of it is original, and maybe none of it is original, but if you go on, there's a Dutchess County site where they go back and look at historical sites. They show the original foundation of the historical home being right underneath where this home is now. So this would have been a wild house because Israel Lewis had 6 children between 3 and 13. So if Colden and Eltinga were staying there, that was a tight location. And later on in January, so during the winter, Eltinga's wife and Colden's wife came and stayed. So they had 2 more people staying in there, their wives too. So it would have been a crazy place. So their exile in 9 Partners occurred between November 9th and January 2nd was kind of the first day. This was before their wives came. They actually went with Israel Lewis and his wife Caroline down to Poughkeepsie because that's where the New York legislature was meeting. They hoped they could, plea for just being paroled on their farms. And I can just imagine what the New York legislature felt when they saw these guys coming in their sleighs in the middle of the winter. I thought we got rid of these guys. Here they're back again. They were denied that, and so they headed back with Lewis up to 9 Partners. So their second stay was fairly brief because their wives arrived on about January 16th, and I think their wives said, let's go try again. I think Elizabeth Ellison must have been a good persuader, because I think she kind of said, let me talk with a few of the people and see if I can get us back onto the farm. But they were unsuccessful again in getting letting them go back to their farm forever. But they did say, hey, you could, because the river is crossable now, it's freezing, but we think you can get through the ice. Go back now and you can stay with your families. So that's what both of them did. So on February 13th, he was back to his farm, but it didn't last long. On October 30th, the New York legislature, so the New York legislature met for their initial session sometime early in this year. And so one of the first things that the new New York legislature did was pass this oath law. And basically it made neutrality not an acceptable option. You're either with me or you're against me. So Colden was more than willing to say, I will not overtly take up arms. I won't speak against you. I won't write articles in the paper about you. But I'm not going to swear an oath of allegiance to the state of New York. He said he would not do that. And they said, well, sorry, if you're not doing that, we're going to exile you to New York City. And on July 22nd, he was ordered to New York City. And I thought this was interesting. The commissioners for detecting and defeating conspiracies were primarily Dutchess people. Egbert Benson, I hope most of you in Dutchess know Egbert Benson, and Zephaniah Platt, and I think Schoonmaker, I think he was from the other side of the river. So by August 6th, he was sailing with William Smith. William Smith was another person who at the start of the revolution was, he was in New York City, and he moved out of New York City because I think he was kind of for the revolution at first, but then I don't know if he thought they were going to lose, but he kind of switched sides. So he was aboard the same ship heading back from New York City. William Smith and Colden did not get along, even though they were both loyalists. They did not get along. If you read William Smith's journal, which he kept a very good journal, he did not have a lot of good things to say about Colden. Colden, on the other hand, doesn't say much about William Smith. And that's another thing you'll learn from reading his journal, is he's very conservative in the stuff he says. He's kind of very careful not to take too much of a stand on anything. And I'm not sure how he got that personality, because I don't think that was a personality that his other brothers and sisters or his father had. So the journal ends, as I said, in about 1779, after he gets to the city. And so it doesn't cover these other events that happened to him, which I thought would be very interesting to know more about. But so in 1780, he was appointed to be a commissary to the British prisoners under American control. So he got to visit the prison camps located across enemy lines. And so he might have gotten to see some of his old acquaintances, maybe some of his family when he crossed lines. So this is the official end of the war. At least that's the holiday celebrated in New York City for years and years and years, called Evacuation Day. And it happened on November 25th, 1783. And so George Washington, George Clinton, the whole American army lined up outside Manhattan. And as soon as the last ship of the British went out, they marched into town in a grand procession. Colden knew he wasn't welcome, and he fled to New Jersey. So there were some places in New Jersey where a loyalist could survive after the war, and he just kind of stuck around there, and he kept writing the New York legislature and his friends to see if they could get him back in. And about a year later, in May of 1784, the New York Assembly passed a bill that said, there are a few people we're going to let back in, and lucky for Colden, I think they figured he was too old and he had never taken up arms, so they let him back in. But in the meantime, a lot of things have changed. The town he was in before was called Hanover. They had changed their name from Hanover to Montgomery. Hanover was associated with the king too much. Montgomery, of course, is your famous Dutchess County general that died during the war. He had a son. He had two sons that fought with the Loyalist regiments with the British, and one of them had died during the war. So there was a lot of sadness probably going back to his estate. But he lived there with his family and also with some of his brother's children. So his brothers were loyalists. And so after the war, they evacuated. They went to England. One of them died, was very sick, died almost immediately. And his children came and lived with the Coldens. And then the whole Feld family. I mentioned the Felds, how the Coldens had married into the Felds. Well, their father, the famous patriot, Judge John Fell, he came and lived with them too. And he's actually buried in the Colden Cemetery. So patriots and loyalists buried in the same cemetery in Colden. And here's the headstone from Cadwallader Colden in Montgomery, located in Montgomery, New York. So, I think it's great in New York that we have this long period to celebrate the Revolution. And most states like to celebrate the July 4th, and that's it. But I think to appreciate what people went through, you really have to realize this was a struggle that went on for 8 years, and it changed families. It changed neighborhoods, and so I'm pointing out 4 places here that I think might be worth seeing in the next 7 or 8 years, where they're kind of part of Colden, but they're also part of the Revolution. And the first one is his home ruins and the family cemetery that's right here west of Newburgh. It's right on 17K. It's kind of behind, the ruins are behind trees, so you might want to make sure you got it in your GPS before you go there. The cemetery is located on a little road just south of that. It's called, I think it's called Maple Ave. It's a dead-end road, and once again, you'll need, it's dead-end because the new, I-84 cuts the road off. Luckily, they didn't go through the cemetery with I-84. But get directions before finding that cemetery, because you do have to kind of hike through a field of grass to get there. The other place is Fort Montgomery. So this is where Colden was sent down. He was, the people that he had assisted in moving through the county of Ulster to get to the British were there too and were tried. That is a state park, and they have a great little museum there in the first weekend of October. That'll be next weekend. They're celebrating the battle of the forts of the Highland, where both Forts Montgomery and Clinton, which are kind of twin forts, were captured by the British, and they reenact it. So well worth seeing. Even if you don't go for the reenactment, they have a great museum there. The third place is the Kingston Courthouse. The original courthouse is no longer there, but the new courthouse is built right on top of the site where the old one was. And the jail that Colden stayed in was in the basement. And a lot of what he writes in his journal was written in that jail in the basement. And then the fourth place is the home of Colden's wife's father and brother. It's probably more commonly known as Knox's headquarters. So General Knox used that home. So there's actually 2 Ellison homes. I mentioned one earlier that's right on the river. That one doesn't exist anymore. So that was used by General Washington as the headquarters. This one's inland a little bit and was used by General Knox for when his artillery was encamped there at New Windsor. But once again, this is a state park. They do excellent guided tours. I think it's more seasonal, so if you want to get the tour, but otherwise you can walk the grounds any time of the year. I hope I've given you a flavor that the Revolutionary War was more than just a battle between redcoats and patriots. It was an 8-year-long struggle that tore families apart, that divided neighborhoods, and that really challenged people to think about what they felt in their conscience and who they had loyalty to. And so I'm happy to take any questions from you now about Cadwallader Jr. or things that happened in this period. Thank you.
When he evacuated, where did he evacuate to? Was it Nova Scotia, or did he go back to England?
So he he really wanted to go back to his estate. So he ended up going back to there's an area here where he had friends. There's a place called Second River. I don't know if anybody's familiar with New Jersey, but it's a place called Second River, New Jersey. That's where the Schuyler's and the DePeisters, a bunch of Dutch people that Colden knew and also had some loyalist leanings, they were kind of waiting to see if they could get back in the state too. And so that's where he went, and he just stayed with them until he got permission from the legislature to come back in.
Second part of that, was his property sequestered?
No, he did something that a lot of the loyalist people did. He sold all of his property early in the conflict to his son. So legally, he didn't own any property. However, the legislature passed a law that said if you got property from a loyalist, you had to pay double tax. So all of his properties were double taxed during the Revolution. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
When you were talking about him being up here in Federal Square, and I think you said that he was at a tavern. Do you know where that tavern is? And was it supposedly in that area?
So there are at least three places that Colden and Eltinga said they stayed. So the first one was called the Talmadge Tavern, and Betsy and I have gone back and forth about, could that have been one of the houses that still existed? We talked about the Caleb Thompson house, maybe.
Well, I thought I said a tavern in the neighborhood. Did it actually say Talmadge?
Yeah. So in Eltinga's journal, he actually says, it doesn't say that in Colden's journal, but in Eltinga's journal, he says the Talmadge Tavern.
Well, there is a house there now that used to have a tavern.
Ah.
From what I understand, but friends of ours live, the big brick house when you come down 83, right in front of Schaefer Road.
Yeah.
And
So-
they bought it like 1970s,
Yeah.
mid-70s.
Yeah, I don't know if you're talking about the Brick Tavern, and Betsy and I have talked about the Brick Tavern. So it's kind of on the corner there.
Yeah.
And I think that it seems kind of weird that there'd be a tavern there and that they wouldn't use it. But in the Eltinga Journal, they mentioned the Talmadge Tavern. So maybe that could have been the Talmadge Tavern, but there's no indication that Talmadge owned that tavern back then. I think we have some evidence that was not the tavern he owned. And then the other one they said he stayed at was Matthias Miller's home, which they said was near the square. And if you look at old deeds, there's Millers all over the place. So who cares? And then the third place was Israel Lewis, whose name was by name. And this kind of puzzles me too, because I would think, well, maybe they'd want him to be a little bit closer to the people that were supervising him. But maybe Israel Lewis wanted because they paid rent, so maybe Israel needed the money, or maybe Israel had something to do with Brick Tavern, and that's really where they were staying. So I'm not sure we know everything about. I mean, I'm kind of open to different ideas, and hopefully this will trigger a little bit more research, and we can maybe figure out more exactly where they were. But good question.
Yes.
The Van Heusen house, is that now still visible as a state marker on Route 209, if I recall correctly, is your name?
Yeah, Van Dusen home is still there.
Before you get to Stone Ridge?
Yeah, it's still there. Yeah. So the Van Dusen home is up here, and another home in Hurley they stayed with was the Hardenbergs. So Jacob Hardenberg was a patriot, but he also ran a tavern. And one of the things that Hardenberg is famous for is he eventually became the president of Queens College, which became Rutgers. And one of his slaves that he had, Sojourner Truth. So his slave actually became more famous than him. I mean, nobody knows who Jacobus Hardenberg is, but everybody knows Sojourner Truth. So Colden may have actually had some acquaintance with Sojourner Truth.
While you're in that neighborhood, was it true that he was on the sleuth
prisons or the ships in the harbor?
So in his journal, he talks quite a bit about his time in the Fleet prison. He complained a lot about the conditions he was housed in, but compared with other prisoners, especially prisoners in New York City, like where Judge John Fell was, I mean, those were terrible conditions. But his cell was stinky in Kingston, but he got a very nice ship with very nice compatriots when he was on the Fleet prison. So they had a group of ships that were in the bay right here by Kingston where they were keeping prisoners. And I think there have been books written on how many ships were actually there, but Colden and his kind of gentleman friends, they had a very nice ship. They had people that brought food in for them. Still complained a lot, but. Yes?
In the image of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where the paneling from his property, there's 2 paintings. Do you know anything about those, or where is the?
Yeah, I don't know their names off the top of my head, but they're the people that the furniture belongs to. So they took the furniture from another colonial home and not from Colden's. So if you go to, if you just Google Colonial Parlor, Metropolitan Museum of Art. What? Van Planks, thank you. Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Oh, the other thing is the paneling from the East Parlor is actually in the Montgomery Town Hall. We were there yesterday, and you can see that paneling. It's not finished as nicely as this. The door to the home is actually in the Town Hall. So you can see that. And they also have a ton of pictures of the Colden home in various states of decay. So if you ever get over to the town hall, just say, I want to go upstairs and take a look at some of their holdings.
We recommend a single volume that deals with the civil and sometimes violent conflicts between non-military loyalists and patriots.
Yeah, there's actually a great book.
Many of them.
Yeah, there's a great book that I think it just came out in the past 5 years, and I think it's called something like Violent Revolution or something like that, because it kind of shows, we kind of think of everybody being real nice to each other, but there was a lot of tarring and feathering of loyalists. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you sitting through this.